All right, YouTube, it's time for Occult Literature video number 106, Magic and Witchcraft by Taylor. Very good work, 77 pages, so a bit longer than some of these sort of treatises on demonology or the burning times, and that's really what at its core it's about. It is a historical piece. About half of its content deals with the burning times, literally court transcripts from that time, the rationale given for the trials, a little bit of the backstory as well, that a lot of it really ultimately was about property, in some cases sexual perversion. Of course, you bring some woman in front of the sort of witch finder, and then, you know, the obvious is happening. It has nothing whatsoever to do with actually trying to find witches. You had to strip them naked in order to check them for the mark of the devil. What do you think they were actually doing much of the time? So as always, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, a second link to my books blog. You can find a great many more titles on the subject of witchcraft from a historical perspective or a more how-to perspective, depending on what you're specifically interested in. But perhaps the most important part of this work is the very end. It goes over a couple of tales actually from antiquity. Now this is somewhat unique. Most works from this period, mid-19th century, where there's some rationalism thrown in, they focus a great deal on the burning times and very little else. This one goes a little bit into demonology actually as well, specifically the nature of Satan, some of the superstitions about what Satan does or does not do from the time. It excoriates the Malleus Maleficarum. It goes on to chastise King James demonology, and importantly, this work, while it exonerates Christians from past eras on the basis that they were tinged with paganism or witchcraft sort of seeped its way into Christian practice because of Roman tradition, it also does uniquely point out the evils, really, the excesses of the church from centuries prior. Essentially, the burning times fully fizzle out in the middle of the 1700s. That's when the last few cases are. 15 and 1600s, everybody was being killed. There was several centuries of non-stop persecution. But the tale of the Lamia, or the Lamia, from antiquity, sort of the serpent cult material, is also here as well. I haven't seen that mentioned in any other comparable work from the period that's dealing with the history of witchcraft. Most often they're strictly Europe. This goes a bit beyond that into the Near East, sort of this superstitious detail. And really it points out this is sort of the basis for studies like Cultus Arborum that come later for Ophiolatreia and so forth. Really, this is the origin piece of sorts that really leads to that interest, sort of that rediscovery of the Near East / ancient Greece, some into Rome mentality, as far as they go beyond just early Christendom. A lot of people prior to this, they're interested in the Christian side, the strictly European side, often Northern Europe, Western Europe. That's really their interest. They're not so much interested in the pagan lore of the time, but in seeking to exonerate some of the Christian activities under the basis that paganism was involved in hoodwinking them of a sort, sort of the Plutonian side of Greek paganism and so forth. Now, it actually details a couple of these stories, which are quite interesting. I have removed the footnotes from this edition because they predominantly just echoed what was being said in the passages. It was kind of, I didn't want to expand its length back up to 100 pages of content when, you know, something like a quarter of it would end up being redundant. It wasn't really necessary, and there were a few pages of like advertisements at the end. I typically remove those because in many cases, the publisher is gone, certainly, by now, you know, a century and a half later. Some of the works have nothing to do with the topic at hand, and so it's kind of pointless to actually slap those in. It would just be lengthening the document for no purpose. So it's down to 77 pages of sort of solid content. Very good work, extremely interesting. You don't have to agree with it all, but it's interesting to hear sort of the rationalist period opinion of King James demonology, which I've also released, of the witch hammer, the hexen hammer, Malleus Maleficarum. Very interesting work. It goes a little bit into some detail about the burning times, specifically from the trial standpoint. specifically what sort of supernatural material was dragged before these courts. It goes into why, but primarily that's the detail that people would be interested in. So again, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, a second link to my books blog for those who are interested in perusing other titles, alchemy, grimoires, those are their actual spell books, summoning, and so forth. Historical works, oracles, works that I myself have written. I'm working on a new work, and I'll be mentioning a little bit more about that later as well. That's about all. Peace out.